Welcome everyone. Today on What I Learnt Today, I'm going to be showing you how to import your Armory character from World of Warcraft into Wowmodelviewer and then exporting an object, your character, from Wowmodelviewer into Blender, an animation software. Once we're in Blender, I'm going to show you some very small steps that are going to make the animation process later on a lot easier by cleaning up your object and preparing it for rigging. So there's only really two tools you'll need today, and that is Wowmodelviewer, which I've pre-downloaded here, and Blender. I'm using Blender 2.79b, and I'm using Wowmodelviewer, the latest release for Battle for Azeroth. I'll show you where to get these now. So if we open up Google and we just type in Wowmodelviewer, it should be the first thing that comes up on your search. Wowmodelviewer.net is the thing that you want. If you click on that and you go into the download tab, you can see the most stable release of Warlords of Draenor. But if you've updated your World of Warcraft, then it's not really going to work very well. And you're not going to have things like Demon Hunters, which I main, which I want to use, and a lot of the models from Legion or BFA. Okay, so I use an unstable release. It sounds scary, but it generally works perfectly fine. Sometimes I need to reinstall it. And that's the WMV installer V090 Beta 11. So I've already installed this, so if you haven't, go ahead and install that. All right, then we're going to go to Blender. Now, it should be the first thing that comes up. If you just get a whole bunch of images of different blenders, well then, I'm sorry, but it's blender.org that you want to go to. And you want to download Blender 2.79b. Cool. So if you haven't done that, go ahead and download that. And now we're ready to get our Armory character. Now the way to do that is we need to go into Wowmodelviewer first. So we open it up and it sometimes takes a little while. Okay, so if you're new to Wowmodelviewer, one of the first things it'll probably ask you to do is actually locate where your World of Warcraft install is. So mine's on the C drive, program files in the usual default position. Some people put it in different places, that's perfectly fine. So go ahead and locate where your World of Warcraft installation is. Now I've obviously done this before, so I'm just gonna go ahead and proceed to the next step, which is loading up World of Warcraft. So Wowmodelviewer is going into the World of Warcraft folder and grabbing out all the different models. So yes, and this can take a little while, and sometimes it'll freeze and crash, but then it will come back to life. So it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Okay. So while it's going, come on, initializing databases. When it's done, you'll see a list of things here which come up, and they're all the models that you can use. So let's just wait for that to happen. The stable version is probably faster, but there we are. Okay, so we're not going to use any of these today. These are different types of models that make up the World of Warcraft universe, different characters, things like that. We're actually going to use the Armory character. So we go to Character, Import Armory Character. Okay. HTTPS, worldofwarcraft.com. There's the Armory character I'm uploading today. Okay, we copy the URL in here and then we open it up. Okay, and it's going to say that there's some transmog stuff it doesn't like. We just press OK. And the transmog stuff it didn't like was the helmet. So we're going to get rid of the helmet. That's number one. So this is what your character actually looks like when you're playing World of Warcraft, apart from the ugly helmet and the weird eyes that are happening. So there's a few things we need to fix here. Yes, number one is the hair. So head, let's take the helmet off. Now, if you want your character to wear a helmet, you can put it in later. But for now, we want the bare bones character. I actually do import some of the shoulder things just because it can be easier, but I'll show you what to do with them later. All right, we're going to take these little eye things off because Wowmodelviewer doesn't deal with Demon Hunter eyes very well. They're just sort of these plastered on bits. What we will do is we will add them later at the rendering phase, so not a problem there. So let's take them off, and now she's just a normal looking night elf with horns. I also actually remove any eye glow because what can happen is you can get unevenness that happens, and it can unevenness on the export, and then Blender doesn't treat eye glow very, very well. All right, the next thing that we're going to want to do is position her in a way that makes it easy to go from Wowmodelviewer into Blender and then start building a skeleton within the object. So I press stop and she should freeze in position. Now I go to the animation and I actually go to face poses. The reason I go to face poses, you'll see in a second. Now it's gonna look a bit funny, but you'll see in a second. Face pose. Okay, so what she's done here is she's dropped her weapons and she's in this sort of T pose. Now this T pose is sort of a generic pose. Her arm should be a little bit higher, but a generic pose for modeling characters and rigging characters, so building skeletons for animation. But there's still a few problems. Now, rigging hands, building skeletons for hands is hard enough without the hands actually clenched like this. So how we stop that is we disarm her. So we're going to take away her weapons. That's important. Right hand, none, so that should release, good. And then left hand. Now, if you want her to be holding weapons, we will add that later at the animation phase. But these are all additives that will make things annoying in the long run. Now, I could take off her shoulder armor, but it's not too much of a problem because they actually come in as separate objects in Blender. So we may as well leave her as is. The nice thing is that it will actually import the textures of those shoulder pieces. Okay, here we go. So we've got her already. Now there is still one problem. Her hair is embedded in her back. That's not a problem. We can fix that later in Blender. Okay, so File, Export Model, OBJ. Now the long version, the long name for this is Wavefront OBJ, and you'll see that in Blender. So go and export OBJ. Call it whatever you want. I've already exported her. Corva Blender Tute. Save. And say, yes, I want to replace. Great. And we're done. So now we close up Wowmodelviewer. So we've now exported our character from Wowmodelviewer and we're ready to go to Blender. So let's open Blender here. This is Blender 2.79b. You just click on the splash screen and it goes away. All right, so this is the three-dimensional scene that you get when you open up Blender. Now, the directions for how to actually maneuver around Blender, the Blender organization does some really good tutorials, and I'll link them in the description. As how to sort of move around this three-dimensional space. It takes a while to get used to. Also, Blender often uses a right mouse button click to do a lot of selecting as opposed to the left mouse button. So if you're used to left mouse button clicking, it can be a little bit disorienting in the beginning, but it gets really easy later. What I'm going to do is, if you are not familiar with moving around Blender, I'm not going to show you that today. I will show you how to specifically use Blender for your WoW character and cleaning up the model. So here's the scene. We need to get rid of this cube. So delete, just press the delete key, delete. Great. Now the next thing is this thing over here. This is a camera. So when you're rendering to export an animation, it actually uses this as the camera. So everything you see is from this angle. It's very important to set up different camera angles if you want to shoot scenes and things like that. So we don't need that now. So we're going to delete that. So press the delete key and delete. Awesome. So by default, this little red and white ball cursor thing will be on the center, and you want to leave that as it is. Over here, this, okay, Shift C, and that will relocate it to the center. This thing here is the lamp. Now, I leave my lamps in place. So if we select lamp, I leave my lamps in place just so that when I'm doing my materials, so when I'm uploading any materials, I can actually see that material on the model. So I leave my lamps there, and we'll get to that in a lot later on in another episode of What I Learned Today. Okay, so now we're ready to import our WoW character. So File, Import, Wavefront OBJ. Locate your character. Okay, characters, Corva Blender Chute, import. And now you should see your character. Woohoo! All right, now I just zoom in and I move around. As I said before, if you're not familiar with moving around in Blender, the Blender organization have lots of good videos on how to do that. Now, I want you to have a look at your over here on your screen where my cursor is. These are all the separate objects that actually go into making your character look the way it did in the Wowmodelviewer. So when we select here, you can see that she's got her waist, her upper arms, and her face. I don't know why they pair them together. Her hair is there. So as I said before, you know, I'm not so worried that her hair comes in like that. We can actually change that. Her trousers, as in her upper legs, her feet, everything's here. Now, these shoulder armor pieces are going to get in the way of building our WoW character, the skeleton for the WoW character. So for now, what I actually do is I right click and I move them away. So I take them off. Now you don't actually need to import them. You can actually get rid of them in the WoW Wowmodelviewer, but I just import them because I can stick them on another layer. We'll go through that a little bit later in another What I've Learned Today. All right, so that's the first thing I do to clean up my model. So this is what we're doing now. We're cleaning up the model and getting it ready for rigging. So there's a few things we still need to do. She comes in as separate pieces. That's gonna be very irritating for manipulating this model. So we need to actually make her one whole piece. So it's really simple. You just go ahead and click on the pieces while holding the Shift key. So Shift, so everything should be selected. Her ears, I think everything's selected. Now, in order to check if you do have everything selected, you can see here that you have all the main pieces of her body selected. These two things down here are the two shoulder sets. So what we do now is we go over to the transform bar here and we click join. That will join all the objects that are separate, and so now when you click away, you'll see that you click the whole thing and she gets all selected. Excellent. Press A to deselect. Okay, now what I'll do is I'll actually name these other pieces so that we don't get confused, because this is a really bloody long name. So renaming your objects is very important, because eventually you're going to end up with this long list of rigged bones, so the armature. You're going to end up with materials. You're going to end up with a lot of stuff. So let's rename everything here. So we have the right shoulder selected. So we go shoulder armor.r. So I always say R. Blender uses .r as a suffix to indicate that this belongs on the right side of a character. So the right side of this green line here, or this red line here, which is your axes, and the y-axis here. All right, let's select the other one. Right click and rename. So we just right click here and rename. It should get highlighted, and we'll go shoulder armor.l. Oops. Cool. All right, so that's all cleaned up now. What ends up happening, unfortunately, oops. Let's locate her back into the center of the screen. We can actually press 1 and 5. Okay, that'll bring her back here. Good. All right, so I just pressed 1 and 5 and that got her looking back in the center of the screen quickly. There's another thing that happens when you export from Wowmodelviewer that I had no idea what it did. And it took me a while to figure it out. So down here you have I'll have a whole lot of selection tools here. You have some menu items, but what we're going to be talking about here is object mode and edit mode. So if we click here, we have object mode, and that gives you this solid surface character. Here you have edit mode. Now, if we select our figure here and we go into edit mode, you'll see what makes up a 3D model, what your character is really made up of, and that's just triangles. A bunch of triangles with vertices, so with corners, vertices, same thing, edges, and faces. Now you can select different versions of corners, edges, and faces by the 3 little things down here, but we're going to leave it at corners or vertices. So let's just clean up what's happened here. So Wowmodelviewer has a lot of duplicated edges and vertices and all that nonsense for some reason. We go over here to the transform key with edit mode selected. Your character should look like this, where you just see her as, or see him or her as, a bunch of triangles. And we go remove doubles. Remove doubles. There we go. So we removed all the double edge vertices. If we click it again, it should not do anything. Great. All right, so let's go back into object mode. So now she's cleaned up a bit. So it's just one of those things that when it comes later down the line and you haven't done it, and it can be very irritating. So now that she's cleaned up, we're going to rename her as just figure. So this is the whole figure. Excellent. Great stuff. Now, while we're here, there is something that is actually very important. So we've gone to all this trouble to combine our object. I'll call it a mesh, because when you go into edit mode, you can see she's just made of mesh. So we go into edit mode. Now, it comes up as a solid painted object here. Go down here, and from solid, we want to go to wireframe. This is one thing that I learned a little bit later on. Now see, look at her eyes. If you want your character, let's say you're modeling a human or a gnome or something with pupils, unlike the night elves and dark iron dwarves and things like that, you want your character to be able to look side to side, and you want to be able to control the eyes. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate the eyes as a separate object. Okay, so to do that, we're going to go into face mode. Press A to deselect everything. We see a whole bunch of confusing lines, and we start selecting these balls, the half spheres. Now it can be a little bit annoying. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I've gone ahead and gone through the painstaking thing of selecting all the vertices of the eyes. So you can see that her eyes are actually separate half spheres behind her face. Now this is important. As I said, if you want your character to be able to look a direction, which I'm assuming most of you would like this, you need to separate these and rig them separately to be able to function. Now for a night elf, not as important. For anything with pupils, quite important. So I've gone and selected these off screen. Now it can actually, off camera, it can actually be useful to use the black dots as a guide as to what face you're selecting. So remember, just a reminder, we're in face mode and you press shift and you just click the vertices that are the faces that are associated with this object. Once you have them selected, you press the P key, just P, and separate by selection. Great. So now you're going to have this separate thing called figure 001. All right. And you can actually start moving these separate. So if you did a good job, you should be able to see all the vertices separate. You should have like eyeballs just sitting in the middle of nowhere. So we did a good job. It can be annoying and it's fiddly, but this is sometimes animation. Now I'm sure there's a easier way to do this, but this is how I do it. I do it separately. Sometimes what I actually do is I delete the vertices altogether and just add round balls behind her eyes to have them as complete spheres. But it came with half spheres, so we did that. So we're going to go ahead and rename these as eyes. So they're just eyes. There's not right, there's not left, there's nothing like that. And now they're separate. And what is actually important, if we go back into object mode and we go into solid, we actually want to see, you can actually still see the eyes are selected here. As a demon hunter, we want her eyes to be green. We don't want them to be normal night elf eyes. We want them to be green. We actually can start manipulating, by having it as a separate object, we can actually start manipulating the color of this material. Now you're probably wondering, okay, well, why does my character look like she's got like no clothes on? She actually does. I'll show you, and it's quite simple. This is the last thing I'll show you today. Material. And there she is. There she is. As you had her before. Okay, if you want to change the color of her eyes to something that is more demon hunter-esque, here we've been left in materials mode, and you can see all her armor and everything is there. Now to change the color of her eyes, because we've actually separated them as an object, we can now do this relatively easily. What we need to do is, because we want to bring this character back into alignment, we need to zoom out with the mouse scroll, and we're just going to take her eyeballs to the side. It's going to look a bit weird, but we're just going to take her eyeballs to the side. Okay, let's zoom in. All right, so here you have the two eyeballs are selected. She's now transitioned to a night warrior. There you go. Demon hunter goes night warrior. I'm kidding. And generally over here we're left in this, we usually see this by default, so where the little camera is. What we're going to want to do is go into materials here. Okay, now usually for this, the original material would have been one of the imported ones from Wowmodelviewer, and that it's just the basic white. We're going to want to go into edit mode, and once again we see the triangles. We're going to want to press Control and select with the right mouse button, the left mouse button, select all the faces. Okay, so now we have everything. Oh, we don't quite have everything, I missed a bit. This is why it's really, really important just to make sure when you're working in three-dimensional space that you just check everything side to side, behind here. So she's not only got some spheres, she's got these plates just behind her eye here. Okay, great. So now everything is actually selected. Now we're going to want to create a new material. So all we have to do is press the plus button here, go into materials, press the plus button here, new. Now at the moment, what you see is what is currently on those eyeballs. We're going to have to go into the diffuse menu, press this white thing, this white bar, and change this to a nice Illidari green. Great. Sometimes I also add the specular shading, which can be kind of fun. So instead of the white, she has more of a green tinge on the eye. All right, now we press assign, and now her eyes are green. Woo! Her eyes are green. Great. We did a great job. Okay. We're going to want to come out of edit mode now and into object mode. If we stay in edit mode and we move these and you deselect something, it's going to distort the eyes. So we don't want that. Back into object mode. And we just want to move the eyeballs along, beep, 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 back into position. Great. And there they are. So we're going to render the glow out later, but for now she's got green eyes and we're happy. We're legitimate demon hunters now. All right, so this was episode 1 of what I learnt today. Episode 2 is going to actually look at building the bones and specifically just building the basic bones of the body. So the spine, the arms, the hands, the legs and the feet and the head. There are many ways you can actually rig a body depending on how complicated you want the movement to be, but we'll get into that next time. So thank you for joining. If you have any comments or questions below, please feel free to just drop me a line in the comments section. If you have any improvements on how I can actually select multiple faces when they're embedded in a mesh, definitely let me know. That'll help me out a lot. Thanks everyone. I'll see you next time.